All right, we should be live right now for Duran Live 38. Everyone in the chat room, if you can hear me, let me know. Welcome to another Duran. We took a week off last week. We had a lot of stuff going on and we couldn't squeeze in a live show. And we still have a lot going on, but we wanted to get this show in there. And we wanted to connect with you guys and see how everyone's doing out there.
Yeah.
So let's see where people are joining us from. We have people from, let's see, Maria from the Netherlands, James from the UK, Noreen from Ireland. All right, let's see where else. Hello, Keith. Keith gave us some news on the Austrian scandal that's breaking out. I'll announce that to everybody. Thank you, Keith, for that news. Let's see, Phoenix from Dover, UK, Phoenix FP40. Hello, Phoenix. Hello from Spain, 4 p.m. in sunny Spain. Janet from Kansas, Rosenberg, Texas. Where else? St. Petersburg. Awesome. Very lucky to be in St. Petersburg. Greetings from Southern California, from Burton, Kansas. All right, guys, if you can hear me, let me know. And I hope the sound is coming off well. Hello from Toronto. Hello, Rosebud. Hello, Pat. Hello from Belgium, Alabama, Australia. We have a video on Australia coming up too, on the recent elections there. So we'll be doing that. That should be going up tomorrow.
Yes.
So hello from Sydney and from Melbourne, everyone that's tuning in. Good to have you here from Washington, UK. All right. Sound is good. James says the sound is good. Phoenix says the sound is good. All right, let's get rolling, everybody. We have in Moscow, and I think it is a sunny Moscow from when I was looking at the weather, around 23 degrees.
Yep.
We have the man, the myth, the legend, host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing?
Excellent day. It's a great day to be outside. Had a wonderful lunch at an outdoor cafe. That's what we live for here, because we only get about 4.5 months of warm weather, so taking advantage of it.
All right, great to have you here, Peter. And we have in the UK, where I think it is a rainy UK, if I'm not mistaken, Alex.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, we have the Oracle of London, Mr. Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you?
I'm very well, Alex, but you're quite right. The weather in London is very changeable. At least in Moscow, they do have about 4 months of sunny weather. They actually have seasons in Russia. In Britain, it's this sort of amorphous fog and wet that we have all the year round. We do have sometimes glorious sunny days, but we're not having any at the moment.
What happens to? I always tell people, if foreigners move to Russia, that you have to pay attention, because you can miss spring, because spring can happen maybe just for 2 days, and then it's summer. It's the shortest season of the year. It's really quick.
Yeah, but last year at the World Cup, you guys got incredible weather.
Yeah. We're real blessed.
Yeah, I was lucky. So let's see if you guys get another good summer in Moscow. All right, let's get rolling, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this live chat, Live 38. Guys, smash that like button, share the channel, subscribe if you are not subscribed, and remember to click the notifications bell so you can make sure that you do get the notifications. And what else do we have? Visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. Let's see, Alexander is wearing the Duran polo with the double-headed gold eagle, the eagle that looks east, the eagle that looks west. And what else do you have, Alexander?
I have a mug which also has the double-headed eagle with a crown, by the way. Also looks east and west. So it's if people know Yeats and poems about Byzantium and of course Russia, but also Byzantium, because we're both Greeks. That gives you an idea of how we look both east and west. We cover all points of the compass, all parts of the geopolitical world.
Very well said. And today we are going to be covering east and west. I titled this live chat Endgame. Get off of the Avengers movie, of course. There were some comments saying who's Thanos and who's Iron Man and all this stuff. But seriously, it is the Endgame, I think. You have China squaring off against the US. We have a video coming out as well on China that I did with Alexander. And Alexander, you mentioned that the economic wars, the tariff trade wars that we see between the US and China was really expected. This should come as no surprise. And these economic disputes are really morphing into geopolitical disputes. And we definitely see, a lot of this embodied in the conflicts in the tensions in Iran, in Venezuela, what we saw in Syria, what we saw manifested with a lot of the tension with Russia, because I know that Peter and Alexander, they always say where Russia goes, China is right behind. So everyone has to remember that we see the China-US thing is starting to really manifest itself, and it's really starting to come through. There's a lot of news on Huawei. I was reading just before this live stream that now Google is not going to be doing any work with Huawei either. So this is big news. Alexander, the Endgame, we are starting to see the US #1 versus #2 in a superpower MMA takedown match. What do you say, Alexander?
Well, indeed. I mean, we are back to a world. We are rapidly moving back to the world of two great blocs. There will be the United States and its allies, and then there will be China. And let's be very clear, China and Russia and its allies also. But there are some fundamental differences between this period of superpower tension and the Cold War. Firstly, this is not really an ideological conflict any longer. I mean, there are some elements of ideology, but it's the US that is really driving this as an ideological issue. I think the Russians and the Chinese are very, very practical, very pragmatic people in the way that the US has ceased to be. But the second thing is that this is a much more global confrontation. The Cold War was really, more than anything else, a conflict fought out in Europe between powers that had been involved in European affairs for a very long time. China, of course, is not part of Europe, not in any conceivable sense. So this is a more global conflict. And the third thing is that this is a conflict between two economic blocs in which over time, and to be clear, the United States will be the lesser economic bloc. I mean, China and Russia, certainly China by itself, but together with Russia, in terms of Russia's natural resources, definitely outproduce the US. And of course, if we're looking at the future timelines, that gap will only grow. The big advantage the US still has is the position of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And yet the very actions it's taking in the trade war show that that period when the US dollar is the world's undisputed single currency is coming to an end. So we must remember this is never true to anything like the same extent during the Cold War. The Cold War was not an economic as well as a geopolitical conflict. And it was not a conflict between two roughly, approximately economically equal economic blocs, with the United States over time facing the prospect of becoming the weaker economic bloc. So this is a different type of conflict entirely. It will probably be one that will be fought more in the shadows, but it is nonetheless the world that we are coming to. So when you talk about the end game, Alex, it is the end game of unipolarity, of the US's unipolar moment. The US itself, in various reports the Pentagon was putting out last year, was talking about the return of great power competition. And now we see that, and it's a fact.
Peter, great power competition.
Yeah, but this is what's really interesting about it, is that if you look at the decades of the Cold War, roughly 4 decades, people got used to that as the norm. But no, that was the anomaly in history. History has always been about great power competition. And we're returning to the norm, what has been played out for millennia. And so the United States knows this. It has been aware of it. Trump uses it as one of his pet issues to differentiate himself from others. It's a, quote unquote, a very patriotic policy. But since they did know it was coming, this administration is just completely disorganized. Essentially, what it's done is it's gone to every single cabinet secretary and say, well, get your China policy together. And everyone's going at it in a different way. And the policy is very incoherent for the Chinese. The Chinese knew it was coming. They've been expecting this. Okay, Huawei, the company, is not going to be allowed to deal with Google anymore. Fine, they knew that was coming. They were prepared for it. They're going to be prepared for it. I mean, it makes headlines all over the world. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like, the competition between cars. I mean, Alexander McKeer's name, a very famous British car maker of the early 20th century.
Of the early trade, well, I mean, apart from Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Daimler, all of those, yes?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they were considered like the premier, the greatest, and then somebody else comes up with someone else. I remember growing up as a young man, we used to make jokes about Japanese goods, all this little plastic stuff, oh, it must be from Japan. Well, by the time I made it into the university, it's like, oh man, I have just enough money to afford a wonderful, luxurious Japanese car. Well, that's happening now too.
Of course it is.
Okay, and the interesting thing for me is that if we put it into a geopolitical context, this explains a lot of the Iran policy. Now, we tend to focus on what the Saudis want, what the Israelis want, what lobbies want in the United States and throughout the Western world. But this is the Road and Belt Initiative. This is the remaking of the geopolitical order. Iran is a critical piece of that on the chessboard. And the Chinese want to make sure that there is a stable Iran. Because if you look at and you might want to throw in some graphics later, but if, the belt goes through, before, during, and after Iran, as you go through on the map here, this is very important. And the Boltons and the Pompeos, they know that to knock out Iran, that would be a significant, not an overwhelming, but a significant blow to China's efforts here. China has a 2025 initiative in which it will be number one in a number of very important strategic industries. So Google doesn't want to play? Fine, that's Google's loss. That's Google's loss, all right? Now, who was visiting the Iranians just recently? Abba from Japan. Very, very important here. So as Alexander McKeer is saying, we're going to have two blocks, but it's how do you choose? Okay, choosing is going to be very difficult for some of these countries. For some, it's a no-brainer. It's obvious. But if you look at when Trump started his tariff war with Japan, a number of allied countries that were affected by these tariffs on steel and other things, they went to Trump and said, well, we understand your concern with China. Why don't we do it together? Trump said, no, I'm doing it alone. See, and this is a strategic error, because if it is going to be two blocks instead of a block in one country, well, the block, the Chinese-driven block, can take on the one country. The U.S. has a overinflated sense of its importance in the global economy as a single country, all right? And so if there's going to be a real competition, it has to be block to block. And the disarray inside the Trump administration on this, why didn't they come to an agreement? Well, because the Chinese are not going to take the bait. What was the deal? They're all saying the Chinese walked away at the last second. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. Essentially, what these negotiations were about was a form of regime change in Beijing and the role of the Communist Party and the role of how financial structures work. This is a form of American imperialism, saying we will have a good trading relationship, but you have to change, not us. Oh, not the people that blew up the world in 2008, 2009. And that'll go down in history as a very important moment, because at that point in time, and then right after that, you have the Chinese Olympics. 2008 it was, the Chinese Olympics. They felt emboldened. And then the US and its financial system blew up the world. And ever since then, the Chinese will say, well, we might listen to you, but we're not particularly interested in your advice anymore because you guys screwed it up. We're not going to screw it up. And this is the US side wants to change the internal dynamics of China, which is a absolute non-starter. And the arrogance of it all. I mean, my goodness. The Chinese, they all through the media to say, well, President Xi, and they always focus it on the president. Well, he is not the only element in the governance of China. He has a lot of interest he has to juggle like any other great leader has to. And a lot of the people around him through different sectors of the economy say, no way can we go through. This is a compromise of our national security. Okay, and the interesting thing is that Trump's whole policy is predicated on a national security emergency. And the Chinese look at the way the Trump administration is dealing with this, and they say, yes, it is, but it's our national security also at stake here. That is the makings of this great competition here. And the Chinese have overwhelming advantages. Number one, it is a one-party state. It is a very authoritarian society. It can take an initiative and say in X number of years it's going to be done. They throw tons of resources at it and they get it done. No, I'm not saying that is, would I like to live in a society like that? Do I share those values? That's a different question altogether. But from a geopolitical point of view, China can get stuff done. It doesn't have a 4-year election cycle. Look at what infrastructure, significant infrastructure has been built in the United States over the last 25, 30 years. I'm still waiting for an answer. Have you seen the airports in the US? Okay. Have you seen the roads? Have you seen the bridges? The Chinese are building the biggest, the bestest, the longest, everything you can imagine. They have the initiative here. And one thing that I always say is that they have a vast internal market. And when this Belt Road Initiative kicks in, that market will grow exponentially, hugely. And the United States is not part of that. They refuse to be part of it, and they will be left out. And they will be the biggest loser. It's because of historical hubris. This is hubris in play. It's not being pragmatic. It's not being pragmatic. And I'll end on, the Chinese never stole one job from America. Not one job. It was American companies that took the jobs out of the United States and went to China to do what? To make profits, to pay shareholders. The Chinese have taken largely the American model, the Western model, and made it work, plus its own specific domestic features. Well, one party rule, communist ideology in, that's lip service. I mean, it's a capitalist country run by a communist party. Okay, that's something new, but it works for them.
Alexander Gobawala in the chat sent an interesting message, which I would like you to expand upon. It says, the Belt and Road Initiative tells us that China has anticipated when Chinese exports to the U.S. will be blocked. The new markets will make up for the lost sales. Then again, they are the Chinese. Alexander, was this going to happen, this multipolar split between China and the U.S., these two blocks that Peter outlined? Was this going to happen with or without Trump, irregardless of whether you had a President Trump who maybe accelerated it a little bit?
Yes. Well, first of all, can I just comment about the statement that our guest made, our visitor made? He's absolutely right. If you follow the Chinese media, which I do, by the way, you can read that they all have English editions: the People's Daily, Global Times, Xinhua, the South China Morning Post, all of the rest of them. So you will see that, in fact, the Chinese have had for some time a policy of moving away from an export-led, low product economy, low quality product economy, towards a completely different kind of economy, much more sustainable, much more balanced, with high living standards for the Chinese people. And that, of course, was what the whole Belt and Road thing was all about, because China is a natural resource short country. So they are building all of these linkages so that they can have those natural resources without having at the same time to pump out exports in the way that they previously did, which exports, of course, meant that they were locked into a situation of continuously having to hold down wages in order to retain competitiveness. So the Chinese have indeed been planning and preparing for this eventuality for a very, very long time. Now,
How about the U.S., Alexander? Can you say that the U.S. has also probably been planning to some extent?
I don't really think so, because of see, again, the command and control element is different in both countries. Is that you have plenty of executives. This has been recorded for years now, for over a decade, where American executives have complained to the U.S. government about Chinese trading policies, particularly in the area of intellectual property. They've made complaints, but they say, but don't go public with it. We just want to tell you. Okay, we're in a competitive situation in China. We don't want to annoy the authorities. This has been going on for over a decade, okay? And now it's getting to, because Trump has taken the reins, now it's getting a lot more airtime, okay? But these executives of these American companies have made a decision where they're going to stay on the side of profits. It's annoying, these practices that they're subjected to, but they still make money, and they don't want to rock the boat. So again, with these two very different models, because the Chinese government, for better or worse, do represent the interests of the people. The people are the shareholders. Okay, that's why I think the American side was getting used to it, thinking about it. Certainly, some individuals were planning for it here. But if you look at policy, there was always this kind of hesitation. And I think that if Hillary Clinton had become president, they would still be in the hesitation mode. The Chinese haven't been in the hesitation mode for a very long time. That's the difference there. I jumped in there. Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, and Alexander, can I just preface it very quickly, going on what Peter said? What I want to ask you is that even though the U.S. may be late to the game, Alexander, so say that Trump has realized what's going on and now he's making those necessary changes. One of the great talents of the U.S. and Americans is that they may start late, but once they get moving, I mean, they are a force of nature. I mean, once they get cranking, they can do amazing things.
Yes, I mean, to come back to this question, I think that the US was in fact going to move in this direction, and it would have done so regardless of Donald Trump. I mean, already in Obama's time, there was the so-called pivot to Asia. Now, this is at this time a military strategic pivot, but it was already being spoken about quite openly by various people as a containing China. And I can already remember reading some bizarre articles at that time about the US fleet using its fleet to interrupt Chinese trade on the high seas, and wondering, frankly, about what sort of things people in the US, the people who are writing these articles, were smoking. But never mind. Notwithstanding this, I think that Donald Trump's administration has accelerated this process markedly. I think it was coming. I think the division between the economies and the two power blocks was going to come, given the kind of society the United States is, in the sense that I don't think the United States finds it very easy. In fact, I don't think it knows how to maintain a good relationship with another country which is either its equal or even its superior. Yeah, I think this is something that Americans simply have no conception of. Yeah. And when they saw China rise, I think sooner or later they would have seen this as a challenge, and it was inevitable that they would respond to that challenge in the way that they are doing now. The United States is a mighty country. It has enormous resources. I have no doubt at all that it will be able to adjust to a situation where it doesn't trade with China in the way that it used to do. It might even benefit, at least in the short term, from it, though I am not sure from that. However, we mustn't make the mistake of thinking that because the US has taken this particular course, that is the optimal course that could have been followed. Another country, like the United States, finding itself in this situation, would have said some time ago that yes, China is rising. We are in a kind of, maybe not decline exactly, but we are losing our historic preeminence. Our role, therefore, must be to maintain good relations with China, the rising power, good relations with Russia, the other great power, in order to maintain stability, which, as the country at the center of the world trading system, the United States benefits most from. And given that peace and stability is something that is in everybody's interest, that ought to have been our policy. But that was never the option that the United States was going to take, because, as I said, it finds it impossible, I think, conceptually, to accept that any other country can ever be its equal.
Yeah, well, I would quibble just a little bit. I mean, Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right, but I think only half right on something, because there was the pivot. Yes, that was a military pivot. That was not a redefining trade relations. Okay, no, it's like I said, I'm quibbling. Okay, but I think that, you know, because of how the U.S. economy has changed so radically over a few short decades here. I mean, look at the record number of bankruptcies going on in the agricultural sector in the United States. It's pretty horrific what's going on right now. The suicide rate among farmers is skyrocketed here. They're going to have to be subsidized to save that sector because of what we're going through right now. As far as Alexander Christopher, people coming together, yeah, there's a historical precedent and record for it. But I don't think China's going to be the thing to bring people together. It's amorphous for a lot of people here. You know, unless we want to get down, and maybe it will go down to some kind of, you know, the Chinese are meddling in our elections, you know, which I've said before. And maybe that's what they'll do, to try to get people to coalesce people. But a country that is so terribly divided and getting more and more divided, I'm not sure that how they can. You know, I guess Madison Avenue will have to turn to them, you know, and, you know, to get the American people on some kind of footing that we're in a existential crisis. That's going to be a real stretch. I suppose it's possible. And I think the Chinese are angling on that, too, because the United States is so intensely absorbed with itself. Because we've said in these podcasts over and over again, the world is changing really, really fast. But they're talking about Stormy Daniels and the creepy porn lawyer. Historians will look back at this and say the U.S. was asleep at the wheel.
Well, let's talk about Huawei. However you pronounce it, I believe it's Huawei is the correct way to pronounce it.
I call it Huawei.
Is it Huawei? I think it's Huawei.
The BBC has taken to saying Huawei, by the way. So I mean, everybody does a different.
Maybe someone in the chat will tell us
those tricky Chinese.
Yeah, maybe they'll tell us the correct way. But there's no doubt that it is a huge company. But so is Google, which is also a massive company, and the U.S. has a lot of massive companies, especially the tech sector. Center, you have Google, Facebook, Apple. Apple's massive. And you have Qualcomm. And John Woo in the chat said Qualcomm's 70% profit is from chip sales to China. This chip sale ban will devastate the U.S. companies. Huawei has developed its own chipset. They will retaliate the Google ban by lowering the price. That I know that they had a plan B, and they're now moving it. They're putting it into motion with the development of chips. But Alexander, Peter, let's go Alexander first. Alexander, do you think that Huawei is the template, is the case study here of things to come?
Well, absolutely. I think it wasn't just the template, but I think, as I said on our video, I think looking back, it was the absolute thing that should have flagged where all this was going, because the United States took let's be quite clear about this, strategic decision that it was not going to allow Huawei in access to the US and to the US's allies, and to set up itself not just as a rival to US tech companies, but, and this is really very important, as a potential security threat. Now, I don't actually buy the theory that Huawei actually is a security threat in any true sense. But the very fact that the US was talking about Huawei in that way shows that the United States thinks of China, which is the country, you know, of which Huawei is a part, is a Chinese company. It shows that the United States thinks of Huawei as an enemy country, because that's its justification ultimately for all that it is doing. And of course, the people in Beijing, the Politburo, the various people in the foreign ministry, the various people in the business community there, they're all listening and seeing all of this. And they're also coming to their conclusions. And of course, this has been on the way for a long time. And can I just say something about the Chinese making their own chips? Of course, the Chinese can make their own chips. So by the way, though it gets less reported, are the Russians. The Russians are steadily replacing US chips in their government and defense industries with Russian-made chips. There is no mystery or magic about making chips. One of the big mistakes the United States consistently makes is that it assumes that it holds the key to some technology and that no one else can ever acquire it. And of course, everybody can. I mean, what people in China, what people in the US can do, the Chinese can also do, and Russians can do, and Japanese can do, and all sorts of people can do.
And Alexander, maybe even better.
And maybe even better.
There's talk now that they're theoretically working on 6G now. Okay,
Well,
they're already thinking about it here. I mean, let's just be honest here. The U.S. wants U.S.-made chips so they can have a back door to everyone, and they're accusing the Chinese of wanting to do the same thing. Come on, it's childish. Okay, all right. If that technology exists in any country with the resources and the drive, can do exactly the same thing. This is something the United States doesn't want to do, and we keep going back to the same issue: is that the U.S., because it's the way it's been conditioned itself, it cannot conceive of a parity competitor in terms of economics and in the areas of technology, you know, and of course the military. See, they have to have a fundamental mind shift in trying to understand how the world is changing. If you do that, then you'll make much more sober decisions, because what we have right now, we have the trade war. We have hostile behavior towards specific Chinese companies. We have American ships in the Taiwan Straits. I mean, it's all wrapped up together. And I would posit here that this is a civilizational conflict here, because let's look at history. In the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Germany emerged as a very powerful country in Europe, and it put the concert of Europe out of balance, something that we had at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. How to deal with Germany, and they didn't do a very good job because there were two wars. Okay, but the difference is here: when after the Second World War, the British dominance of the globe shrank radically quickly, very quickly, with decolonization. And the United States took the mantle. Now, why am I giving all these historical examples? Because they're all Western based, okay, within a Western paradigm. But now we have, since the high point of the Chinese Empire, which is essentially ancient now, we have non-Western power making a bid for dominance, maybe even hegemony. And this, I would dare say, this goes into almost a racial conflict, because this is a truly different phenomenon than the Western world has seen since its own adventures into different it is here. And that's why it's having a very difficult time coming to terms with this. An Asian country could be the dominant country in the world. That is something that is just impossible to come to an understanding about. And we're going to see it. We'll see the yellow peril all over again. We've already seen hints of it.
All right, let's get to some super chats, guys. We have a lot of super chats in queue. From American Rebel, good morning, Duran and fellow chatters. Thank you, American Rebel, for your super chat. From Gender Neutral, super chat 199. China and Silicon Valley businesses are a dire threat to speech. Yes, they are a dire threat to speech. From super chat in Chinese text, but with a cloud avatar. Let's see. How will the Northern Sea Route, and the One Belt, One Road affect China? Alexander, how will the One Belt, One Road be affected by the Northern Route?
I think it will be an extremely important part of it because, of course, and by the way, the Russians are heavily investing on developing it. They're building up a massive nuclear-powered icebreaker fleet. They're developing the cities along the Arctic coast. And of course, and this is the thing that the West always focuses on, but it shouldn't just focus on this. They're building up their military presence in the Arctic in order to secure that route and to make sure that nobody interferes with it. But of course, the Chinese will be there, and the Chinese will be there with full agreement with the Russians. The Chinese are going to be there because, of course, this area is very rich in natural gas and oil, resources which China needs. And of course, if you want to move large, large numbers of goods, of large tonnages of goods, it's much, much more economical, far more economical
and quicker
to do it by sea, and it's quicker than to do it by rail, which is the only other realistic option. And given that the US has been dropping all sorts of threats, as I said, about blockages around the South China Sea and in the Pacific, why not send them through the Arctic, where you will be going across seas which are completely controlled by the country which is your best friend, which is Russia, and that we are going to be seeing on an increasing scale. It is absolutely part of the Belt and Road. And I would add, by the way, that China is also in the process of building a nuclear-powered icebreaker.
All right.
The interesting thing here is that we keep focusing on what China wants to do in the world, and it's not. It isn't going to achieve its ends through the military. See, this is what the U.S. has always relied upon. Okay, I mean, what sea lanes are the United States trying to protect to get their goods to market? No, they're threatening to cut the sea routes of others trading, not American trade. Okay, this what makes it very asymmetrical, because the U.S. military does not solve problems. Okay, it can cause a lot of problems, but it doesn't solve any. And the Chinese have a very, very different way of looking at it. I mean, they want to become, well, they are the factory of the world now. And now they want, and as Alexander McCurris rightly put, is that now they want to go to the high end. They want, computers, telecommunications, all kinds of stuff like that, where, the West had no peers, or almost no peers. And now there's real peers out there. And like I said already in this podcast, the Chinese have the ability to pour vast resources into a sector to build it up very, very quickly. Okay, and once because they have the political will. See, this is the West has lost its political will to achieve political ends, and the Chinese are just doing it. Not running past, just walking right past the West, because the West is focused on all the wrong things.
All right, Peter, super chat from E-Ray Reichly. Soybeans are the U.S.'s largest export to China. China has just put tariffs on them. I have seen the vast agricultural potential of Russia firsthand and feel that Russia will take this market from the U.S. What do you guys think?
That was already a headline today that I read. Yes, absolutely. Stalin destroyed Russian agriculture because Russia was the wheat basket for Europe before collectivization. And now one of the greatest unsung stories of the new Russia since 1991 is the development of its agriculture sector. And it is the largest food exporter in the world right now. And it's not GMOs, all right? And so that potential, as a friend of mine put it, he's in the business. he said it's the cost of entry is very high, but once you've made the most important initial investment, your profits go like this. You can't lose, all right? Unless you the state gets involved and starts jeopardizing market forces here. But as I pointed out, I mean, and it's something we all have to take a look at. I mean, the agricultural sector in the United States has taken a really big hit, really big. Now, I'm always told, like on Fox News, it's going to sting, but it'll be all right. Well, it's stinging. I want to know how you're going to make it all right. Okay. This is it's a very key sector. It really is an important sector. For goodness sake, it's food. Okay, so the Chinese are very, very well aware of what to hit, what sectors to hit, and what companies to hit to return the sting. Okay, we're going to see this. We're going to see this go on and on and on. Hopefully, I mean, what the Chinese do is they not only do they want to be an aggressive exporter, but they want to be also self-sufficient. And with the vast resources that Russia has, as Alexander McCure put it, best friend. They will have access to those resources. Why? Because China will build infrastructure inside of Russia. Because Russia doesn't want to be just an exporter of raw materials. That's not a good trade policy, okay? What they want is say, you come, we'll have a joint venture, we'll build the factory, we'll develop technologies together, and we'll both profit. And the Chinese will say, that's win-win, we'll go for it. And they are going for it all the way across the Eurasian landmass, all the way to Italy. Okay, people want trade. Trade creates peaceful conditions.
Alexander, you're banging away at that keyboard.
You know, I was just checking, and I saw that U.S. exports of soybeans come to $22 billion in 2016, compared to $59 billion, which is the exports of aircraft and aerospace products. And then, incidentally, for those who don't know, the US's second biggest export after aircraft products is oil. So you always hear about, the Russians being an oil economy. The US is also a very, very big oil exporter. It exports about $57 billion of oil goods every year. And it's its second biggest export.
Yeah, but also too, where it makes a lot of money, which is it becomes very problematic, is the export of arms. Okay, well, that is a huge thing. Yeah. Okay, and that creates very dangerous political realities, aka the Saudi regime. Okay, arming it to the teeth so it can plummet the poorest country on earth. Okay, and Trump is constantly selling arms. Okay. For me, it's a good business model if you're a shareholder in these companies, okay? But overall, it is not something that, if it's going to be the center of your economy, then you're in trouble, okay? Because then you want wars, then you want threats, okay?
But just to come to this, I mean, you can see where the problems potentially for the US are, because of course it's now an oil exporter, but Russia has far greater potential as an oil exporter than the US does. Russia, as our listener correctly says, has huge potential as a soybean and food exporter. It potentially could dwarf the US.
Yes.
And if we're talking about aerospace products, which, to be very clear, is the US's it's the single biggest manufactured item that the US exports. Russia is rapidly putting together its aerospace industries. It is now moving together with China to develop co-production in this field. They're planning on building a wide-body jet aircraft line together. And of course, the Russians are rapidly putting together plans to develop a whole range of aircraft engines, from the PD-8, which will be the smallest, all the way up to the PD-35, which will be comparable to the biggest jets that the United States puts on its civil aircraft. So we're looking at an across-the-board challenge, combining Chinese and Russian resources. And this is something that has never happened before. If we go back to what I was saying about silicon chips and the ability and the illusion the US always seems to have that only they are able to produce this kind of technology. What has been true until recently is that the US has been able to pioneer these technologies because it has always had more resources. It's had more resources than its industrial competitors, and it's had far more resources than the Soviet Union, which was its former superpower rival. What is changing this time is that the aggregate economic potentials of China and Russia taken together right across the board are greater and result in more resources than those of the United States. Now, this is not an existential crisis. For the United States could prosper. Despite that, it could remain a very powerful country. But if we're looking forward to a position of superpower competition, then it is in a race it cannot win.
Okay, let's do another super.
I mean, just look at what happened with Boeing with their 737 Supermax. Okay, I mean, sloppy work. I mean, I just watched a documentary today about it, and talking to aviation experts, former employees of Boeing, and saying that the quality comes first mentality is gone because they're chasing profits. Okay, and having those 2 air crashes of the 737 over the course of 4 or 5 months, it sends a signal to people. You know, the quality isn't there anymore because they're chasing after profits. And if that's going to be your only goal, then you're going to get sloppy. Okay, and a lot of countries in the world. I mean, I'll be honest with you. My next flight and it's a 737, I'm going to say, can I get a different flight? I don't want to fly on that airplane. No way. Why? Okay, and their reputation has been really hit hard. And Boeing used to be at the very, very forefront of aviation. Okay, and it got sloppy, lazy, and greedy.
All right, a super chat from Enrico. Peter, will Europe finally crack down on Google for showing once again to be a monopolist controlled by the US government?
I think that some of the moves that are going on in Europe could be replicated around the world. Okay, I mean, and I'm going to do a separate program on it, even maybe this week, about Google and Facebook, the case for breaking them up. I think that the time has come here for the reasons that we have talked about so many times on these podcasts here. It's bad for competition. It creates very high costs of entry for competitors. And obviously closest to my heart, because I'm in media, is that why should Mark Zuckerberg determine what's moral, what's immoral, what's right, what's wrong, what's politically correct and not? Why should he decide? He was never elected by anybody. Okay, and we have to take these. These issues into close to heart and start really thinking hard about it. The current business model of these monopolists is not working. It's not working for consumers. It's not working for what we would call political speech. Okay. Again, future historians will look back at this and say it was a good idea that they had to start breaking these things up. Let more competition, more voices, more opinions. That's what makes us stronger. What these monopolies are doing is that it's creating a sluggishness. It'll actually cut down on technological innovation. It already has. The cost of entry is so high. Okay, then fine.
Yeah, I mean,
Alexander Macron is cracking down a lot on free speech, on speech via social media and social networks. Do you think that Macron's model is going to carry throughout Europe?
Absolutely, and I mean, this is absolutely no question about this. We're seeing this in every major European country. The same is happening in Germany, incidentally, and of course, it's happening in France and it's happening in Britain also. Can I just say about Google? I'm very sorry to say this, but I think that the chances of the European Union cracking down on Google are almost zero, at least while the present powers that be remain in power. If there's going to be a challenge to Google, a legal challenge, which I think is highly likely, I think the more likely place it will happen is in the United States, where Google is making a lot of enemies by its very, very partisan position in the political conflicts that are taking place there between conservatives and liberals, and between Democrats and Republicans. So don't expect anything like that to happen in Europe. And I'm afraid in the meantime, it is Macron and people like him who are making the running.
Guys, since the focus is China, we are placing a focus on China when it comes to social media and technology. China has the social scoring system, which is absolutely terrifying. I mean, if you have a bad social score, you can't even buy a ticket to get on the train.
Yep.
Is this our future? I mean, if we're saying that China is going to be, you know, the leading superpower and is going to outpace the US, you know, what's happening in the States right now with Facebook and China, with Facebook and Google and Twitter and all that stuff, okay, it's bad. But when you look at China and the way they handle technology and social media in that aspect, I mean, that is just absolutely terrifying.
Okay, well, but I don't see any indications whatsoever. I agree. I think what they do, I find that really scary, to be honest with you. But I don't see China forcing it on other countries at all. If you look at the rise of China, where is there one instance where they try to export their model onto someone else? I see zero evidence of that at all. You have to, you know, we call it China. But, you know, what is it? It's like 98% Han Chinese. This is the Han civilization, okay? And if you're not Han, you're not really invited into it, okay? I mean, you can live there, but you're not part of them, and you never will be part of them. They will never welcome you as part of them. It's how they see themselves in the world. Now, I want to repeat, do I think that's a good idea? And would I like to live under it? No, because I'd have a zero score. I wouldn't be able to walk the streets, okay? But I don't see the threat that China wants to export onto others. They're a very nationalistic people, very nationalistic. And they are very, very proud of their ethnic origins, their ethnic state, okay? And I think it's fair to say they probably feel superior to others, but it doesn't mean you mean they're going to take this accreditation system and force it on Somalia or Ethiopia? I don't think they really care. They just want to have ports and they want to have trade, and that's just about it. They really don't care about other people, to be honest with you. Okay, they want to see a world system that works for Han civilization without exporting their views.
Alexander, there's a comment from Zaxilix. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly on the chat. It says, don't be naive. Google is doing it for them. There's a point here that Google is working with China on much of the search technology and much of that social credit, social ranking system. What do you make of that, Alexander?
Right. Well, a couple of things to say. First of all, I mean, I've been to China. I found it a very cheerful and happy and friendly place.
I did too.
And I mean, one certainly doesn't feel that the Chinese people themselves feel very oppressed by the system. It's certainly not one I would like to see in the West. And I don't think the danger is that the Chinese are going to try to export it to us. I think the far greater danger is that some people here in the West, looking at what the Chinese are doing, may say, well, maybe this is something that we could start to imitate, because he gives us greater control. And this is exactly, I'm afraid, where Google comes in. Now, Google is not popular in China, as I discovered when I was there. It's actually very difficult to access anything in China that goes through Google. But the listener is absolutely correct. They are involved in helping China. And of course, I don't have any doubt at all that if the command came down from somewhere in Washington or Brussels, that we need to move towards a much more controlled system, perhaps in some way approximating to the Chinese credit scoring system, then I can easily imagine all sorts of people in Silicon Valley and elsewhere jumping on that and helping to achieve that, just as Google has been helping the Chinese. So that's the danger to my mind. I hope we never come to it, but I'm not by any means confident that we won't.
Good point.
All right, Peter, a super chat from Sparky. We have a lot of super chats, guys, to get to. From Sparky, Bolton and Pompeo are bulls in a China shop. May have spoiled Trump's China strategy. By the way, forward, don't use irregardless. It's regardless. Okay, thank you. So, Peter, Bolton and Pompeo.
Well, they've upended just about everything.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, boxing Trump into Venezuela, spoiling the summit with the North Koreans, spoiling for a war with Iran. I don't think any of these are initiatives that come from Trump. Trump has a long history of being anti-Iran, okay, for a long time. But he got elected on being not a peace candidate, but maybe a moderate anti-war candidate. And he saw that it worked for him in 2016, and I think he would think it might work for him in 2020. But the guys that he got around him, they might spoil it all for him. At the end of the day, it's on him. It's all on him, and he's going to have to make some fateful decisions pretty soon because he's got some super aggressive neocons surrounding him. And I mean, we made a separate a video about Pompeo's visit to Moscow. What a car wreck that was! Whoa, big time. Okay, I mean, what's happening is that these policies and these postures, these attitudes are isolating the United States, not isolating. I mean, Iran and Japan just had a high-level meeting. Okay. Japan doesn't like to see any daylight between the United States and Japan in foreign affairs, but they're just saying these people are off the rails, okay, off the rails, and Europe is not going. The Europeans have given Pompeo and Bolton the cold shoulder. I mean, like I said, I don't like to always go to the optics, but I mean, the optics in all of these situations are really, really bad, and this is something that the entire world sees. The U.S. Do you think any audience in the United States knew that there was even a meeting between Lavrov and Pompeo? I don't think so. I don't think what the CCTV carry it, closed caption in the U.S. I doubt it. Okay, but a lot of other people saw it around the world and drew basically the same conclusions I did.
Alexander.
Well, I think our listener put it very well, a bull in a china shop, and that's exactly what they are. I'm sure the pun also being intended, by the way.
Yes.
These two people, Pompeo and Bolton, behave as if it was still 1990 and that the United States can throw its weight around and everybody will jump to attention, which of course isn't the case anymore in the world. And they're also, I think, sensing that the moment is passing. And I think they think that if they throw their weight around a little more, they can bring back the world to what it was in 1990, or even perhaps in 1950. And that isn't going to happen. What they are doing, exactly as Peter said, is that they're making more and more people around the world question the wisdom of the decision-making that's going on in Washington, worry about the increasing aggressiveness they see coming out of the United States, and wanting to distance themselves from the United States instead of making a common cause with it on any number of issues where they might otherwise do so. So I think that certainly these two people, Bolton and Pompeo, have made immense damage to the US's relations with China. The Chinese, by the way, I was reading in Global Times, which is an important Chinese English language newspaper. They even said that they did not want Pompeo to be involved any further in negotiations with China. The North Koreans have said the same, by the way. But I mean, they find Pompeo simply unbearable as a person to deal with. And that's a very strong thing coming from the Chinese. And as I said, it's antagonized China needlessly beyond any measure of what was necessary. And it's exactly as Peter said, upsetting lots of people everywhere.
All right, guys, we finished up the first hour of this live stream. Remember to hit that like button. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe as well. And also make sure that you hit that notifications bell. That's the only way that you will get notifications when we do push out a video. So thank you to everyone who is joining us on this live stream. Let's continue with a couple more super chats. Alexander from Chelsea, even if the populist parties sweep the board at the EU elections, will it make any difference to the globalist route the EU is taking?
We've discussed this on previous programs, and the answer is that it will make some difference, but not very much, because the European Parliament, in and of itself, is not a very powerful institution. So long as the people you are referring to, the people who are pursuing a globalist, Atlanticist, integrationist, neoliberal agenda, retain their positions in Washington, London, Paris, New York, and Berlin, they will continue to run the show in the West. What goes on in Strasbourg, where the European Parliament is based, I'm afraid can be largely, though not entirely, disregarded. Having said this, it is better to see populist parties winning elections rather than not winning elections. It does show that the challenge to the globalist agenda is growing, and we're seeing that in all sorts of places. We see it most vividly for me in Britain, where I live, with the massive conflicts over Brexit, but we're seeing it in France with the Gilets jaunes, we're seeing it in Germany with the AfD, we're seeing it in Italy with the rise of Salvini's party and the Five-Star movement, we're seeing it with the things that Viktor Orban is saying. So let's not discount it, but let's not place too many hopes on it either.
Yeah, it's very interesting, though, too. I tend to agree because it's such a weak institution. However, it will show the glaring divide that's going on in Europe. If people are given the right to vote, they vote away that is very contrary to the ruling, the elite's ruling mantra about politics. It'll be a glaring difference, and that's going to beg a lot of questions. I mean, like, we have the vote, but you have the power. How does that work? That's exactly what people are going to say.
All right, Peter from AP. Can Turkey trust Russia with an alliance against Saudis and Israel? Erdogan says co-production of the S-500 and the Su-57 were offered, and the U.S. said they would not even fuel the current F-16s in that case.
I think the better question is whether Russia can trust Turkey.
I was just going to say that. Look. I mean, but this is how, again, we have to break out of the paradigm of the Cold War. Okay, the relationship, we've said this many, many times, the relationship between Turkey and Russia is very, very complicated. And they will work together on issues that they have commonality in, and then they will openly admit, I remember seeing it many times during press conferences, we just agree to disagree on this issue. But we still work together on the issues. I mean, Russia is not going to get involved in any kind of alliance against Israel. Sorry to disappoint people, but they're not. Russia's not going to get involved in an alliance against Saudi Arabia. Sorry to disappoint you, but they're not. Because Russia recognizes these are political realities on the ground. Instead of wishing them away, or you have to change, like Pompeo and Bolton keep saying all the time, Russia says, okay, here we have the situation, the constellation of forces here. Okay, this is the reality. This person, Netanyahu just got reelected. He's going to be the longest serving prime minister in Israel. We have to deal with them. We have to deal with them. We don't like their policies towards the Palestinians, but maybe we could put our weight into diplomatic initiatives to help them. Okay, when the deal of the century is released after the end of Ramadan, Russia will have a position on Jared Kushner's vision for the Middle East. It's just another Picot all over again, almost exactly 100 years after the dividing up of the Middle East. They want to try it again. And you know what? The first time it didn't work out. It's not going to work out this time either. So please don't try to put Russia as enemies of countries. Russia doesn't have enemies. Okay, it has problematic relationships with some countries, and some countries has really good relations. But see, that's an American Western, point of view. You are enemies. No, Russia doesn't have any enemies. Okay.
I agree with all of that. I mean, I would simply say this. Firstly, I think that the Russians do not want to get into an alliance with Turkey, or at least with the current Turkish government, which is not quite the same as Turkey, and with President Erdogan. Given what a volatile individual Erdogan is, and given how grandiose some of his ambitions are, I think the very last thing they want to do is to find themselves in a situation where they are in alliance with Erdogan, in any kind of alliance, formal or otherwise, and are expected to back him into the kind of messes that he's likely to get himself into. As for Turkey, my impression of Erdogan is that whatever he is a man who greatly values his independence and Turkey's independence and its ability to make its own decisions. And I do not think he will want to take Turkey into any kind of alliance with Russia, formal or otherwise, which he must know if it ever happened, because of the immense preponderance of power that Russia has, would mean that Turkey would have to take a subordinate position. So I think, exactly as Peter says, these two countries will work very closely together on certain issues of their mutual interest. I think they will develop their energy projects. I think they will develop their nuclear power projects. Their economies are already very well integrated and trading with each other. Lots of Russians go to Turkey for their holidays. Lots of Turks go on building projects and are involved in construction projects in Russia. But I don't think that we should take this too far and talk about an alliance. Certainly not, as Peter rightly says, an alliance directed at anyone else. I don't think either power wants that.
And under Russian law, the Russia does not have any military alliances at all. It does not is not a member of any military alliance at all. It can have very, very high-level strategic cooperation, a la China, for example.
Yes.
But and I get this from my Chinese friends about our alliance together, and I always say no, it's not an alliance. And I say, Russia, like China, values its sovereignty. Okay, okay. An alliance would compromise that, diminish it, and that's something that is not going to happen here.
Okay, MG sent us a $10 super chat. Thank you, MG, for that super chat. We really appreciate it. Clara Wallen sent us one $50 super chat, and Clara Wallen sent us another $50 super chat. Thank you, Clara, very, very much for that generous super chat. And Peter, we have a super chat from Bob Lyman. Peter, when you were in college in the US, I presume, were you ever attracted to the communist or the Maoist politics?
Oh yeah, I was a real lefty. Yeah, I was. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know what? I get, because I'm so familiar with the post-Marxists. I can use their works against the liberals and the left myself, because unlike other people, I actually read this stuff. Okay, I read Gramsci, people like that, Durkheim. I read them. I know what they're about. Okay, so I'm very well. I have a good toolkit to deal with it. But yes, I was right. Look, I don't know, maybe only American viewers will understand this. My parents were part of the John Birch Society. That was the most radical anti-communist organization in the United States. And I guess it was just my childhood rebellion. And so I read Das Kapital. I read a lot of other Marxist writers, and I actually was good at analyzing them. Okay, I know the Frankfurt School inside out and backwards. So yeah, I red pilled. Okay, I'll say it here. I did, and I'm very happy about it. I feel great. Okay, I'm really glad I got that virus out of my system. Okay, now having said that, I always want to make clear to people, and I know you guys, Alex and Alex, you know this. I'm a cultural and social conservative. Okay, I do not worship capitalism at all. Okay, that is an economic system. I don't worship economic systems. Okay, I'm more of a person of moral and social ideas. Okay. There's any number of things that progressives can talk about the economy, and I might even agree with them. But I want to make sure families are made and families are kept together. Okay, I want to make sure that people of religion have a place in the public square. freedom of expression is absolute with me. Okay, no compromises on that. Okay, and when it comes to the economic sphere, I'm willing to talk, and I always go into conversations with an open mind. Okay, tell me how it will work. How much will it cost? Who will pay for it? And who will get the benefits? Now, if you can do those simple things, we might be able to agree on something. But the Green New Deal, no, I don't believe in nationalizing the economy. Okay, I've lived in countries where the economy was nationalized. It's sluggish, it's boring, it's not innovative, and it always gets down to the mediocre middle of everything. And I don't want to live in a society like that. I don't like living in like in the United States where you have the financialization of the economy. That doesn't work for people. That works for shareholders. The economy doesn't work for people. And that's what's important. And that's the kind of economic system I support. So I don't support any kind of ism when it comes to economics.
All right, Alexander, we have a super chat from Penguins fan, and we were going to get to this topic actually, but Penguins fan has brought it up for us. An update on Idlib and Syria, Alexander.
Yeah, that's been very interesting because, of course, the Syrians and
we have news.
We have news. I mean, the Syrians and the Russians had been sort of nibbling away at southern Idlib, and there was talk about a military offensive coming. And then suddenly, out of the blue, yesterday, the Syrians announced a unilateral ceasefire in Idlib. Now, when that tends to happen, that is almost invariably a sign that there's some kind of negotiation going on. And I suspect that's exactly what we're looking at with the Russians and the Turks probably in detailed discussions about probably a pullout from southern Idlib. I think that the way things are now heading is that we're going to get southern Idlib liberated first. I think they will then move up to north, but I don't think they will move throughout the whole of Idlib province, perhaps as quickly as I would have liked, because I think, as I said, they're doing it in an incremental way, by negotiation, backed by arms.
All right, let's do another super chat from Penguins fan. Peter, Iran-US situation. What will Iran do?
Well, Iran will survive. Okay, it will survive. Can the United States flatten Iran? Yeah, of course it can. Okay, well, but it begs the question: what does victory mean? Okay, because I cannot see under any circumstances where there would be American troops on the ground. That would be a doomsday. It would be worse than Iraq. They are not invited there. There is not in place a puppet regime that could serve American and Western interests. They would not have any legitimacy. And that would mean a very long-term occupation that would be very, very expensive, very hard to justify. Iran can survive. Now, it can be hurt very, very badly, but Iran has enough military capacity to inflict enormous pain in the region itself, in Iraq. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates would not be left untouched. Global oil prices would skyrocket. It would be a global recession. Iran it would experience enormous pain, but it would still be able to have the capacity to return that pain, particularly in the region. This is, the Pentagon knows this. Okay, now what they're playing is some kind of limited strike, but still, that a limited strike is that then the Hormuz Straits would be closed. Okay, closed. Okay, 1/3 of the world's oil would stop moving. All right. I mean, this is the conundrum that they have to deal with here. But what I really want to impress upon everyone is that Iran will survive. Okay. And so what does victory mean in this military conflict? It's a Pyrrhic victory. Okay. That's why this is ridiculous. All of it is ridiculous. And it is all invented.
All right. Alexander, let's do some more super chats. From Nick Champion, thanks for the great reporting. Been enjoying your channel for a while now. That's a 10-pound super chat. Thank you, Nick, for that super chat. And Alexander from Penguins fan, OPCW leaked memo tells This chemical weapons attack in Syria was staged. What's next? We did a video on this, Alexander. Get into that, the OPCW.
We did. This is, in my opinion, a huge story. And
huge story.
And it's absolutely extraordinary. The curtain of silence that has descended on it. In Britain, the only place it's been mentioned in mainstream media is in a small comment that Peter Hitchens, who writes at the Daily Mail and is something of a rogue journalist, who is nonetheless allowed to publish in the Daily Mail, he inserted it. But, you know, if you go through the BBC, the Times, the Guardian, the Financial Times, you will find no mention of this anywhere, nor is it being talked about in the House of Commons, nor is it being talked about, as I said, anywhere in any of the big discussions or places where it should be talked about. It is a huge story because I think what it shows, I was saying this right from the outset, from the moment the Duma fell, that because the Russians and the Syrians went there almost immediately, they were able to take control of the crime scene, and they were able to ensure that way that the inspectors, the OPCW inspectors, were able to go in and see the crime scene before it became manipulated. Now we see what has happened. A report has been provided to the OPCW by its inspectors, which, you know, as we say in England, puts a coach and horses through the whole story of an Assad government chemical attack on Duma. In fact, it's impossible to reconcile with the claim that there was an Assad government chemical attack on Duma. It seems to me it is now overwhelmingly likely, in fact, it's clear that this was a staged incident. And yet, amazingly, the OPCW sought to suppress the existence of this report, published a report which appeared to corroborate the Western official narrative, even though if you read that report closely, it was riddled with inconsistencies and non sequiturs. And now when this actual research report, engineering report has been published, as I said, a wall of silence has descended. Now, all I will say is this: I have no doubt any longer that the Duma incident was staged. I always thought it probably was. Now I am sure it was. Given that the Duma incident was staged, why suppose that the earlier incidents, the one in Han Sheikhoun that happened the previous year, or the one that happened in Eastern Ghouta in August 2013, weren't staged also? I have never understood this argument that violent jihadi terrorists are incapable of staging incidents of this kind. And it seems that they staged one in Duma, and I suspect they did it in everywhere else too.
And where are the Skripals?
Oh, well, indeed.
And where are the Skripals?
Where indeed? Where indeed?
Where are they?
Well, believe it or not, there was an article which I read which tried to link the two things. I mean, it claimed that the incident in Duma was orchestrated by the British government in order to somehow distract attention from the fact that the Skripal attack didn't go as planned. I have to say it was a theory so complicated that even I finally lost track of it. But there we go. I mean, all kinds of things.
But see, it's a really perfect example there. Since Western audiences are not given reported, they're not given access to real news.
Yes.
All they're given is a dosage of propaganda every single day. They don't talk about these things, and then people are left to come up with their own ideas. But if people were given facts, presented with facts, then we could draw coherent narratives. But because we're not informed well, people come up with this. That is the origins of all of these quote unquote fake news. Okay, certainly there are bad actors out there, and it's usually just for clickbait. But there are other people that are saying, we're not getting the full truth, and this is what I think. And sometimes they come up with a crazy idea. But it's because we're not given a menu of real news. That's why we do these podcasts.
Exactly. Exactly.
Peter,
I mean, that's the
Yeah.
key point, actually. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this report is big news. This OPCW report, it is big news. It is big news because it calls into question what happened in Duma. It shows that that attack was staged. It is big news because it shows that the OPCW is no longer a reliable organization. And it is big news because it shows that the Western media, in spite of those things, won't report it. And that in itself is a big piece of news.
and the entire Western narrative on Syria is proven to be illegitimate, wrong,
yes, exactly,
false.
Exactly.
All right, Peter, a question from Rich Wendell. Might you be able to briefly cover why the founders of the Soviet Union didn't like Israel even way back then?
If you're talking about
they didn't. The Soviet Union was the first country to recognize Israel as a sovereign state, and Golda Meir was the first Israeli ambassador to the Soviet Union, and she was welcomed with open arms. So there was not hostility towards. As a matter of fact, the reason why the Soviet Union was so keen to support Israeli statehood is because they saw it as an anti-British imperialism move. Okay, so it had nothing to do with Jews or religion or anything. It was a geopolitical gambit. You know, this is a country that came out of the mandate that was set up after the First World War, and it was just seen as a anti-colonial pitch, and that's the reason why the Soviet Union was so supportive of Israel at its origins.
I mean, if you're talking about the founder of the Soviet Union and you're thinking of Lenin, I mean, of course, Israel didn't exist at that time. But what Lenin did oppose, and opposed very strongly, was any suggestion that Jews, Russian Jews, should have a separate representation within the Social Democratic and Labour Party of Russia, which eventually became the Bolshevik Party. He always insisted that everybody of whatever ethnicity who was a member of that party should be subjected to the same central discipline as everyone else. So that was his position, because that was what he thought about. But I've never really heard that Lenin took any great interest in the Zionist movement, which, as I said, barely existed in his day.
All right, going back to the OPCW story, Alexander, we have a super chat from Miss K, 50 Swiss francs. Thank you very much, Miss K, for that super chat, which is now also the OPCW. And even to my biggest fright, the Doctors Without Border, Médecins Sans Frontières, are corrupted. This is big news too, exclamation mark. This is big news if they are corrupted.
Oh, it is. It is. It's huge news because, of course, you see, the problem is that we rely on institutions like the OPCW, like Doctors Without Borders, like Amnesty International, like all of these famous institutions which back in the 70s and 60s and before used to carry out their roles properly. We rely on them to be key mediators. So we need to be able to trust what the OPCW says. We need to be able to trust what Doctors Without Borders say. We need to be able to trust what Amnesty International says. When all of these institutions, instead of fulfilling their roles properly, start to become handmaidens for American power and propaganda outlets that support the narrative that is coming out of the Pentagon and the State Department and the Washington think tanks and the neocons, that's when we lose any ability to get a complete and proper grip on what is actually going on around the world. I say we, I mean, obviously, those of us who work on the Duran, because we read a multiplicity of different sources, we're able to some extent to get a sense of what is actually going on. But of course, most people are not in our privileged position. They have far more demands on their time, and they can't follow the news as closely. And so they rely on what the OPCW and Doctors Without Borders and organizations like that say. And I think this is a very, very terrible thing. And I would add, by the way, it's a very terrible thing for the West, because the West, the Western powers, during the Cold War, the one great advantage they always had over the Soviet Union was that they were always able to say, we report objective truth. What the Soviets do is that they don't report objective truth, they engage in propaganda. Now, that was their great advantage. It's why so many people believe them. If they engage in propaganda themselves all the time, as they are doing, and they subvert these mediating organizations like the OPCW, as they have done, they will lose their greatest weapon in the great conflict that we were talking about earlier in this program between the two great blocs that are now emerging, and which was once their great advantage. They will simply have thrown it away.
And that's
Peter,
why we do these podcasts.
That's why we do these podcasts.
So, Peter, we have a question from Rich. What are the chances that the U.S. and China just come up with one big, grand trade deal and just bridge all this stuff and be done with it?
No.
Not going to happen?
Not going to happen. No. It's the Thucydides trap, okay? You allow China to rise, you compromise, or you go to war. The first two are not on the table.
Yes.
Maybe in some circumstance they might, but this is this is the end game. That's what we're calling it. Okay.
Yes.
No, I don't see this, because I'm repeating myself, but the U.S. in its heart of hearts, mind of minds, believes that China must become like us. You must become like Americans, and then everything will be fine. And the Chinese, the Han culture, the Han civilization says, no way, never, under any circumstances. Okay? The U.S. has taken compromise off the table. Okay? They should recognize the nature of the Chinese position. And then if they could understand that and accept it, then you can start negotiating. But in the political culture we have in the West, particularly in the United States, is that there can be no real peer that is anti-American, I guess, in their mind. Okay, and so that's why if the worst is to be avoided, they better get rid of people like Pompeo and Bolton, and maybe get somebody like Ron Paul or Rand Paul up there and say, this is the situation we're facing. And if we can compromise here, compromise there, they might start compromising, and we can get through this. But the adults in the room are not making the decisions. Okay, I'm very pessimistic.
Well, I've been watching and following commentary in the US, and I get no sense that any part of the US political and economic establishment is interested in any kind of compromise on trade with China. All I'm hearing are demands that essentially would amount to China capitulating, and the Chinese are not going to capitulating. So, like Peter, I don't think there's any possibility of a comprehensive trade agreement happening. I just don't see it.
Right, Alexander, a super chat from Penguins fan. Erdogan needs to make up his mind, either SDF or Syrian government when it comes to bad guys.
Well, absolutely. I think that is the decision he's going to have to eventually make, because I mean, the reality is he got himself into an adventure in Syria, which has brought him nothing but woe, and brought Turkey nothing but woe. I mean, he gambled disastrously on the wrong side. He lost appallingly. He's been very, very lucky that the Russians, that he found in the Russians a partner that was prepared to help him out of the mess he'd got himself into in Syria, and to treat him with great respect, and to go up to enormous lengths to preserve his face. Other countries would have been much less forgiving. But as I said, at the end of the day, he's got to sit back and think to himself, what is in Turkey's long-term interests? Turkey's long-term interests.
No, his long-term interests.
And well, also ultimately his too. And I mean, his long-term interests, and which on this issue I think are the same as Turkey, is a stable, friendly Syria within its internationally recognized borders. Now that requires him to accept that the Syrian government needs to restore control over all its territory. And it also means finally accepting that he must come to some kind of rapprochement with Assad in Damascus. I think we're a very long way from the point where Erdogan is prepared to do that. But maybe eventually he will get there.
And once the Arab League has finally, in every sense of the word, returned Syria to the Arab League, then it's going to be Erdogan that's going to be the odd man out. So the time to make some kind of reconciliation or a gesture is well overdue.
Yes.
All right, Peter, a super chat from Penguins fan. Where is Russia when it comes to Planned Parenthood and abortion, given what's going on in Alabama? Alabama is a big story in the U.S., as well as Georgia and their recent abortion laws. Peter, what about Russia when it comes to abortion?
Russia, unfortunately, the pattern that was developed in the Soviet Union remains. Abortion is readily available. Unfortunately, it is not used as birth control like it was during the Soviet Union. Women would have multiple abortions. Okay. Now people are far more affluent. Having a family is a very popular idea. So abortion is not a politicized issue in Russia like it is in the United States. Other than that, I really don't know much about it because it's not really something that's talked about because it's not a political issue here.
That's exactly right. I mean, my impression from following this story, to the extent that it's ever an issue in Russia, is that most Russians are content to leave the issue where it is. So abortion, there is far less abortion than there was in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Whereas Peter correctly says it was the primary method of birth control. Now there are far more sophisticated and varied ways for people to, for birth control. There's contraceptive pills, there's all the things that you have in the West, and the pattern is very similar. And there is also abortion, which still goes on, but is nowhere near as widespread. And I think that this is probably the situation that we're going to see continuing for the future, because I think it's the situation that most Russians accept as being the normal one. There are anti-abortion people in Russia. I mean, there is the Orthodox Church generally disapproves of abortion, and that's putting it mildly. But I don't think on this issue it has much traction.
Okay, Alexander from John Huber, super chat. U.S. firms spend to buy back shares. Huawei et al. Spend to innovate. Hence, the U.S. are falling behind, and companies like GE are hollowed out and fragile. What do you make of that comment?
I think this is entirely correct. And I think this is a point which comes back to our earlier discussions about Google and the monopoly position that Google has achieved. Because when you get monopolies, what the monopolies are concerned about is concentrating share ownership, which means buying back their own shares. It means knocking out competitors by rigging the market against them. It means doing all sorts of things, but not innovating. And given that the United States prides itself on being this great innovative in entrepreneurial economy, I would have thought that would be a source of concern for people in the United States. Well, it is for some people, but nowhere near enough, and not enough at the moment to challenge the monopolization and oligopolization of the United States that we see happening. And it's very remarkable that a country like China, ruled by a communist party, seems to be doing this in a much more purposeful way, doing the kind of things the US used to do, research and all the rest, which the United States is no longer doing.
Okay, Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. Are the South African refugees still coming to Russia, or is Russia still taking them, given what's going on in that country?
I haven't heard any update. I'll look into it for our next chat here, but I haven't heard any news. But I haven't heard it stopped. I think the status quo is what was announced a few months ago is being maintained. They're welcome here. They're definitely welcome.
Alexander, do you know anything that's going on there?
My guess is, by the way, that this story has been a little bit oversold. I mean, I don't think there are vast masses of white farmers coming from South Africa.
Not vast.
Vast. But, I mean, I suspect there's still a trickle of people coming because, frankly, anybody who wants to get involved in agriculture Russia is the place. I mean, as I said, it's got enormous resources, vast, rich lands, ripe for development. And if people from South Africa want to come there and develop, then they're welcome to.
And Russia has the right regulations. I mean, like I keep saying, this is an unsung success because the regulations. If you're a foreigner now, the absolute ownership of the land is in many ways in question, but you can lease it for a very, very long time and you can reap the profits from it. Russia is very sensitive about selling real estate. I mean, residential is one thing, but large swaths of land is something that's not within the realm of possibility. But you can get a lease and it will be legally protected. I know because I know Austrians, Germans, French, Brits, Americans, and others that have come here, and they love this place. This is an agriculture mecca, and it is making people rich.
Absolutely, and the Russian government supports agriculture very strongly, and of course, the Russian government is also very, very heavily promoting the agricultural machinery industries, which are growing rapidly in Russia. So this is a major growth sector in the Russian economy, where the Russians were happy to welcome anybody who wishes to come and do honest and good work in Russia. So if people from South Africa want to come, they'll be welcome. And as I said, as Peter says, I actually know one person from Britain who's very happily and successfully established himself in Russia.
Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. Can we have an update on Venezuela?
I don't really have anything. I think it's in stasis right now.
Stasis,
I mean, it's in stasis.
Well,
go ahead, Alexander. Go ahead.
Well, the story I heard is that there was some kind of negotiations going on.
What, in Sweden or
in Oslo? In Oslo,
right.
In Oslo, between Guaido's people and Maduro's. And by the way, this is not a secret negotiation. The people who went to Oslo did so on Maduro's instructions. So this is not part of some sort of plan. My own view is that this has been such a complete fiasco, this whole Guaido movement, such an utter and disastrous debacle, that I think people are now trying to find some kind of a way of disentangling themselves from it. Because realistically, I mean, it's quite clear now, I think, that Maduro is not going anywhere. Now, can I say, to those who will no doubt remind me, I had not expected that when this whole crisis began. I thought the odds against Maduro were very, very
You've
high.
already apologized. Stop kicking yourself.
I know, but there we go. But there we go. I mean, he's showed remarkable staying power, and all credit to him.
All right, we still have a lot of super chats to get through. So let's keep on rolling. From Chelsea Alexander, super chat. I've asked this question before. I wondered if you know how the legal challenge to the Brexit delay is getting on in court.
I've heard that it's going nowhere, actually. I gather that it's bogged down, and I don't expect it to go anywhere very far. If you want to understand what's going on in Brexit, focus at the moment on the European elections, where Farage's party, the Brexit party, is expected to do very well, and also focus on the increasing contortions within the Conservative Party as they face this growing challenge. The legal challenges are a sideshow.
Peter, a super chat from Ho Chi Minh. Russia has been encircled by NATO for over 60 years. Despite the end of the Soviet Union, the West continued to expand NATO further east. Russia now doesn't trust the word of the West. What do you make of that super chat comment?
I think that the Kremlin now is torn a page from the Ronald Reagan playbook, trust but verify. Okay, I mean, fine. If we can verify that you're telling the truth, that we might, it's been mooted that having a global INF treaty for intermediate missiles, if the Russians were presented with a reasonable, verifiable treaty option, they'd definitely consider it. Of course they would, but if the olive branch is Mike Pompeo's performance in Moscow a few days ago, well, that's just a non-starter. Okay, basically, it's surrender, and we can be friends. That's the message, and it doesn't get any traction here for obvious reasons. Okay, Putin a number of times. I think it was with the Italian media. He actually brought a map once and showed all of the all the bases surrounding Russia. Okay, I mean, if Western audiences were just shown that map on a regular basis, you know, and so and how many bases, American bases, surround Iran? I mean, and Iran is the threat, really? I mean, it just turns completely upside down. Russia will defend its sovereignty. It will go to a nuclear option if it has to. It has made it very, very clear that it will use all means necessary to protect its sovereignty. And they've said it repeatedly, openly, emphatically. So don't poke the bear.
Peter, follow up on that with another super chat from Penguins fan. You mentioned Italy, Salvini in Italy. When will the EU sanctions be lifted on Russia?
Well, he's been very outspoken about that. Yeah, it's no longer unanimous. Now it's gone to consensus, and now the Italians are saying they're not going to support it anymore. I think it's basically the Europeans will probably come around to it, not immediately, but it's definitely moving in that direction. Russia has been reinstated in the Council of Europe. It is because it stopped paying its dues, and all of a sudden, we're short of cash, so they caved on that. And with Merkel basically out of the picture, it's going to be there'll be a moment where this can be wound down because the sanctions are not popular. They are not seen as legitimate, and so Russia, as I've said all along, they play the long game. They play the long game, and with Zelensky inaugurated inaugurated as president in Ukraine, he came out with quasi light reconciliation. He's saying something that the Donbass situation has to be resolved without losing sovereignty. So that's where they have to square the circle. But Europe is tired of Ukraine. There's Ukraine fatigue. The 5-year operation that Victoria Nuland, F the EU. It's a spent force. Okay, it doesn't mean problems are going to go away. Actually, different problems can arise here. But with Nord Stream 2 coming online, the whole Ukrainian energy gambit has come to a complete failure. Okay, this is another awesome, overwhelming loss. Okay, and the Ukrainian people, poll after poll, show that they are not interested in NATO membership. So, Victoria Nuland, you lost.
I think the Council of Europe decision is a very, very important store in the wind. Now, it still, as I understand it, has to be approved by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. So we're not quite there yet.
Not quite there.
But the fact that this decision was made, because this was one of the original big gestures that was taken at the time of the 2014 Ukraine crisis. I mean, it was to suspend the Russian delegation from its voting rights, and by the way, use that in order to fill the European Court of Human Rights with lots and lots of anti-Russian judges who are now predictably passing lots and lots of anti-Russian decisions. But I think the Russians can live with that if, as I said, they can get their full membership back. I think that the will, as Peter says, to keep this conflict with Russia over Ukraine going is now fast draining away. I'm going to make a prediction. I don't know when the sanctions will be lifted. The EU will lift the sanctions. But when it happens, there will be an awful lot of recriminations within Europe at the way in which Europe was dragged along and was made to play this game. I think a lot of people in Europe, I mean, I know some of these people lost businesses as a result of those sanctions. And a lot of people will be very angry, and they will say, what in the end was it all for?
Alexander, a super chat from Sparky. Queen Elizabeth II can put parliament and bureaucracy in the Tower of London. Does her long experience tell her things will shake out best without intervention?
The thing about the British Queen, is that she keeps the council very, very much to herself and has never acted in any way that conflicts publicly with the opinions of her prime minister, whoever that prime minister is. So I personally don't think that the Queen will act. I mean, by the way, what our listener said, I mean, he's quite right. She does, in theory, have those powers, but I cannot see her exercising them unilaterally. And I suspect if a prime minister came along, Boris Johnson, for example, not Theresa May, who's far too weak of a position, and asked her to take those kind of measures, I think that she would not be happy, and I think we would have a political crisis. So I don't think anything like that could happen. But there is one thing that may happen, which is that if Theresa May does do what she says she's going to do, which is announce that she's quitting in June, and if there is a Conservative leadership election, and if the winner of that Conservative leadership election is Boris Johnson, and if Boris Johnson does become Prime Minister, lots of ifs there, by the way, as those who are listening to me will have noticed, because none of this is guaranteed. Then Boris Johnson, as the new Prime Minister, committed to Brexit, indeed committed to a hard Brexit, would be confronted with the fact that he has a House of Commons that is almost completely opposed to him, and in which he doesn't have a majority. And what I think he might do in that situation, in order to get Brexit over the line, in other words, in order to get Brexit through by the 31st of October, including possibly a no-deal Brexit in that case, is he might go to the Queen and ask her to prorogue Parliament, that is to say, to adjourn Parliament until the 31st of October, so as to prevent any more parliamentary manoeuvres happening intended to obstruct Brexit. Now, I'm not saying that is what will happen. I can imagine that there would be a huge outcry if Boris Johnson did do that, but I can just about imagine it.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
No.
Okay, Peter, super chat from Penguins fan. John Bolton wants to install MEK in Iran. Who are the MEK?
This is a cult. This is a fanatical cult. They were. It was under Hillary Clinton that they were taken off the terrorist list. They are terrorists. They have committed terrorist acts within Iran. This group of people found sanctuary in Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war, that 8-year war that almost nobody in the West has ever heard of, which was one of the bloodiest since the Second World War. These people are dangerous, and they are fanatical, and these are the people that Rudy Giuliani and others are talking up. They're actually, Giuliani and others make speaking fees from them. They're showcased in Washington and through capitals in Europe. This is their regime change puppets. Okay, these are the people they want to take over. They have no standing inside of Iran whatsoever. Okay, this is a dangerous Trojan horse that would never have legs unless the U.S. and its allies supported it. This is a very, very bad, awful organization of people.
It is indeed. And can I just also add that once upon a time, it was also backed by Saddam Hussein. So...
Exactly.
All right. Alexander from Keith Durant. This is about the video that we did on Austria that I published before the live chat. And it says, I found a Russian businessman, Igor Makarov, worth billions, according to Forbes, who was buying it to Latvian gas companies in 2017. He also has investments in Cyprus. It is well, and Makarov also said that it is well known that I was an only child in the family, and so I don't have a niece. That's what he told Forbes. What do you make of those comments by Makarov?
Well, I think that this confirms what we said in our video, that this whole thing with the Freedom Party was a transparent setup. And frankly, I think that we ought to be asking questions about who would want to set up the Freedom Party in that way. I mean, clearly, this glamorous young Russian woman that they met in this villa in Ibiza this villa with all the TV cameras and microphones and all the rest, so that their comments were recorded, was not what she pretended to be. We've now had Mr. Makarov himself confirming as much, and that this whole thing was spun out of nothing in order to discredit the Freedom Party. And it is extremely sinister how this was done, and it is extremely sinister how it is being used. And of course, it is being used right up on the eve of the European elections, where the Freedom Party was expected to do well and was expected to form a major component of this coalition that Salvini and Orban are trying to put together.
I guess he should get together with George Papadopoulos and talk about how you get set up, okay?
With Russian nieces.
Right, okay, and I have this opportunity now. I'm glad we got there. I want to make a public announcement here. I owe George Papadopoulos an apology. I did not speak in the highest terms about him. It's because I wasn't well informed enough. I watched a wonderful interview with Mark Stein with the both of them. George Papadopoulos is a very smart, articulate person, and I hope that he will get his issues will be addressed, and that he will be compensated for the pain and suffering that he has gone through. Okay, and go keep doing what you're doing, George, because I was very impressed, and the more people that know your story, the more you are a credible person, and I really hope that Donald Trump will give you a full and free pardon for what the U.S. government did to you and the allies of the U.S. government. So keep it strong, my friend.
Indeed, sir. Can I just add a point, by the way?
What a story.
What a story. Can I just add a point, which is, of course, we've now had, in the Papadopoulos case, the so-called niece of Putin, who, of course, Putin doesn't have a niece, who Papadopoulos was introduced to. And we've now had with the Freedom Party story case, the niece of Mr. Makarov, who doesn't have a niece, who Mr. Strache of the Freedom Party was introduced to. Could these people possibly be Ukrainians? Just asking.
Just asking. Just asking.
Well, let's go to a Ukraine super chat from a Penguins fan. What do you guys think of the Klitschko brothers who championed Ukraine into the EU? The Klitschko brothers are like carpetbaggers.
Well, indeed, sir. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing because, of course, Klitschko, I can't remember which, anyway, one of them was the mayor of Kiev at one time. And during the Maidan protests, he was expected to be the great leader. And before the Maidan protests, he was going to be the person who was going to stand as president of Ukraine against Yanukovych in the election that was supposed to happen in 2015, but which, of course, never did happen because of the Maidan coup, which took place before. And then, of course, it turned out that he was a broken reed and an absolute nobody and a zero as mayor of Kiev. And I've heard that, frankly, he's not too bright. And I've also heard, frankly, that he's rather too fond of the bottle. And I've also heard what the listener says, that he's somebody who, despite his great reputation for integrity and honesty, which he traded on during the Maidan protests, is perhaps not quite as honest and is not quite as full of integrity as we were led to believe that he was. So I'm afraid the two brothers, the Klitschko brothers, formidable boxers, though they no doubt are, as political force in Ukraine, have turned out to be nothing.
Okay, can this be the last question? Because I have to run pretty soon here.
Yeah, we still have quite a few super chats. Let's try to run through them. If you have to go, Peter, let us know. And Alexander could run through the remaining super chats.
Okay.
If you have 10 minutes, Alexander, I mean,
I do, absolutely. But if Peter, don't feel...
But Peter...
I'm moving to a new apartment and the internet.
Okay, let's do this one last one, Peter. This one last one for you because, of course, it has to do with Canada. China-Canada crisis. What's going on, Peter? Why is Canada getting involved in this?
Yeah, why is Canada getting involved in this here? When the correlation of forces are moving against Western calculations vis-a-vis China. Canada starts acting up here. I mean, it's going to be slaughtered in all of this because it's going to be in lockstep with the Trump administration, Justin Trudeau. It's a lose-lose situation for Canada. It doesn't have the resources and the imagination to deal with these issues here. I'm really at a loss here. Right when the time when you probably think you should be cooling your heels, you're sticking your head out like that. For me, I can't explain it unless there's, it's Christine Friedland that's under gaze of Bolton, okay, and Pompeo, which is possible. She's a neocon.
No.
All right, well said. So Peter, if you need to go, if you could stick around, and we can finish out these remaining super chats, that'd be
all right.
cool.
Let me. I'll pop out and then I'll pop back in.
Okay. Okay. Let's see if we're still okay.
Save this space. Save this space.
All right. Alexander, are you ready to
Absolutely.
roll?
Go.
All right, let's go. Alexander, a super chat from Penguins fan. South African government, SA government, taking white farmers as land. Will Trump intervene on this like last year when he did?
Well, he might do. It's the kind of thing that plays very well for him. He's always, I think, shown an interest in these sort of subjects. And I think he might calculate that it plays well with his political base. So I think he might interfere with, he might involve himself in it. I don't think the South Africans will be very happy if he does. And I don't know what difference it will make if he does. But I can certainly see him doing it. And in fact, if anything, I would predict it.
All right. Alexander from Penguins fan, a super chat. What are the ex-USSR states like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and others like now economically? Do they still rely on Russia or do they have US bases there?
Well, there are no US bases any longer in Central Asia. The last one was in Uzbekistan, and I think actually it was in Kyrgyzstan, and the Kyrgyz government threw it out. And there was also a base in Uzbekistan, and it's also gone. My understanding of it is this, which is that Kazakhstan, though it's pursued a fairly independent policy on some things, remains very, very close to Russia and very, very heavily integrated with Russia. Nursultan Nazarbayev, who was the long-standing president of Kazakhstan, who's just retired, but who's still seen as the father figure of the country.
Semi-retired.
The father figure of the country. I mean, he attended the 9th of May victory parade in Moscow just a few days ago. So Kazakhstan is very close. Now, the other Central Asian states, there was a tussle between the US and Russia over them, especially during the George W. Bush period. That's over. The Russians have won. The Russians now have excellent relations with all of them. I understand that the Uzbeks still sell by far the greater part of their cotton to Russia, which is the sort of trade pattern that was established in Soviet times. And of course, there is also growing Chinese investment in these Central Asian states, but they're increasingly they're part of the Belt and Road project, but then so is Russia too. So I think we can say that to the extent that these republics, these Central Asian republics, are part of Russia's backyard, they are very much on friendly terms with Russia, and Russia's backyard there is pretty secure.
And the difference is too, I mean, Hillary Clinton once said that that Putin's Russia is trying to recreate the Soviet Union. Nothing of the sort is happening right now. During the Soviet Union, the Russian Soviet Republic, it subsidized the rest of the Soviet Union. That does not happen anymore at all. Okay, what Russia says is that we can have good bilateral relations with each former Soviet republic, but it has to be mutually beneficial. Yes. So, Russia is not going around subsidizing building infrastructure for the former Soviet republics at all. I mean, if they get paid, of course they'll do it, okay? But there's no more, it's not for gratis anymore, okay? And the Soviet Union today's Russia doesn't want to do that, okay? It wants to protect its sovereignty and have good relations with its neighbors, okay? But it has respect and mutual benefit. Nobody's getting a free lunch anymore, as it should be.
All right, Peter, a super chat from. Oh, Peter's gone.
I'm got no.
Oh, Peter's
okay.
What
My dogs are always looking for something to chew on. Okay.
All right, Peter, a super chat from Chelsea. How worried should people be by the massive censorship on social media that is being introduced by the globalist Western governments?
They should be. It should be the top of mind story. Okay, it started with Alex Jones, and now it's Janusz. What is this? Yeah. What is it? What's the
Paul Joseph Watson?
Right. Yeah, these people. I mean, they're the test case. They're the test case to go after many more people here, and when the worst. What what's really worse about the situation? It's journalists that are cheering this on. Journalists are cheering on that other people that are people that have influence, that influence public opinion, are being shut down. Journalists are doing it. It is so shameful.
Yes.
Alexander?
I agree with that completely. I mean, this is a massive issue of concern. If I have to be frank, I think it's the single most worrying thing that has happened in the West in my lifetime. I mean, there have been other things that have happened. There have been economic crises, there have been political crises. I've never known anything like this. An attempt to control the public space and to control opinion and to control news and media reporting and to use bans and essential censorship. And that, it seems to me, is one of the most frightening things. As I said, I never expected it. I never conceived of it. And yet it's happening. And I don't think people are anywhere near as opposed to it as they should be.
No, a lot of people are actually supporting it, which is the scary part.
Well, it is, absolutely.
Yeah. Alexander, super chat from Penguins fan about Cyprus is divided between Turkey and Greece. Turkey invaded in the 70s.
No, it's not true. Cyprus is not divided between Turkey and Greece. Turkey occupies a part of Cyprus, which is an independent country.
And it did it illegally under international law.
Exactly.
And it is
but
still
because
occupied.
because it was a NATO member, it was given a free pass.
Exactly.
People always, say, "What about Kosovo?" when they make reference to Crimea, and I always say, "What about Cyprus?" Okay, because that is the original sin there. Okay, so if you have a strong patron on the international scene, you can break the law. Okay, that's what happens.
And there is a lot going on in Cyprus, especially now that they have discovered a lot of natural gas. Israel, Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece are developing that gas. But Erdogan is moving into the area, and he's making claims on that gas find as well. And we have a video. We'll get into that this week as well, because it is a very interesting story.
Yes, but please don't say that Cyprus is divided between Turkey and Greece. I mean, Cyprus is not part of Greece and never has been. Not since Greek independence, not since Cypriot independence. Cyprus is a different country, an independent country, very different from Greece in many ways.
A very proud country, too.
Very proud country.
And Cyprus is a unified country where Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Armenian Cypriots, Lebanese Maronite Cypriots, they are all considered Cypriots.
Correct.
So we need to clarify that as well. All right, a super chat from Phoenix FP40. Alexander, may I ask if you will be voting Brexit Party May 23rd?
I've not yet decided, but probably the answer is yes. Who else is there to vote for?
All right. Thank you, Alexander, for that. And from Penguins fan, Peter, is the West has become communist and Russia is what the U.S. used to be back in the day? Okay, I think I get that question. The West has become communist and Russia is what the U.S. is now becoming. In other words, the U.S. is moving more towards a communist type of model, and I guess Russia is moving more towards what the U.S. used to be.
Well, I don't know. I think it's very simplistic there. I think what's happening is that what's happening to the United States is that people are too willing to give up their freedoms, okay, that we've traditionally upheld here. If there's socialism in America, at least now, pre-AOC, it was socialism for the rich and capitalism for everybody else, okay? That's what I object to strenuously, okay? And so it used to be, they used to talk convergence, where they both would become more alike. The power relations within Russia are it's power vertical, okay? I mean, the Kremlin is very, very strong, okay? Because and historically that has been necessary because Russia is such a vast country to rule. It's huge, okay? And we saw the dangers of the lack of power vertical under Yeltsin, where you started having governors on the border of the Russian Federation actually starting diplomatic initiatives with the country across the border, basically blocking the central authorities in Moscow to make decisions. And that's when your country starts falling apart. And so the United States, on the other hand, is a very decentralized place. And it's gotten so decentralized is that you may see states like California go on its own way. So I think it's an interesting analogy, but it doesn't hold a whole lot of water. Certainly, what we were talking about with social media, it's becoming far more authoritarian in the West right now. But that is because of corporate interests. It's not it shows the weakness of the state, not the strength of the state. Okay, and that's very dangerous too, because when you have these economic and monopolistic actors more powerful than the state, we saw this in the late 19th century with oligarchy and monopolies in the United States, when Teddy Roosevelt said, "No, you have too much power." Okay, so there's so many different caveats to that analogy.
What I would say about this is that I do think that in the West you're starting to see the emergence of what I would call a totalitarian impulse.
Yes, I agree.
Which used to exist in the Soviet Union, but certainly does not exist in Russia now. And what I mean by that is it's not just a case of people being banned from saying what they want. It's that people are required to say, to believe, in effect, what they're told to believe. And you're seeing this more and more and all the time. I mean, there is a continuous ideological push on you, especially on social questions and issues which relate to people's personal and private lives, which I find really rather troubling. And I think that is a totalitarian impulse. Go on.
And all those traits, they're absent in Russia.
No, absolutely.
There is no ideological forcing people to take on some kind of ideological propensity. Not at all. Zero. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, super chat from William. The Duran owns Monday, maybe. Enjoy a lot. All right, yeah. Monday is a good day for Duran, that's for sure.
Yes, it is.
And Alexander, a super chat from Sparky. Remember, the last historical revisionists succeed. Queen Elizabeth II intervened in the 1975 Australia crisis, ending in the sacking of the Aussie Prime Minister.
Right, now, she didn't intervene personally, but her Governor General did. And can I just say that was a shocking affair that should never have happened. And while I hope very much that it doesn't happen in Britain. Now, can I just explain what happened to those who don't know? In the 1970s, Australia had a left-wing government led by a man called Gough Whitlam, who I remember, by the way, and whom I have had a lot of respect and a lot of time for. But he was very unpopular, and many of them said that his economic policies were not very successful, and the United States didn't like him because they didn't see him as politically reliable. So out of nowhere, the Governor General of Australia, who was the Queen's representative in Australia, simply sacked him and called an election, which Gough Whitlam and his Labour Party lost. And that inaugurated a long period of Conservative rule in Australia. Now, as I said, that was a gross intervention by the Governor General, who was a British official in Australian politics. It brought the Queen into the crisis, And I know that I've heard that the Queen herself was extremely unhappy to have been involved in that way, especially as she and Whitlam, the Australian Prime Minister who was dismissed, apparently at a personal level got on very well. And it did for a time result in a rise in Republican sentiment in Australia. So I think that the Queen herself would not want to see anything like that happen in Britain.
Okay, thank you, Alexander, for that explanation. Peter, Super Chat, Penguins fan. Who owns the majority of the Arctic, Russia or the West? Who has more natural resources in the Arctic, Russia or the West?
Oh, well, Russia, I think, has the strongest claim to the largest part of the Arctic. Russia has certainly invested a lot of resources into the Arctic. I'm trying to remember, it was a few years ago where if it was it a Canadian or American icebreaker? They were supposed to go through the ice, but they had to call it off because they were afraid if they got stranded, it was American. They called it off because they were afraid they would have to call the Russians for help. So they didn't. They decided not to go through with it. Russia has made numerous claims on the Arctic and has very strong cases. Okay, and then Pompeo again just crashes the party. I mean, they had this Arctic conference not too long ago, like a week and a half ago, and they've had, I don't know how frequent they have it. Let's just say they have one every 2 or 3 years, and it's always been very harmonious. It's because of, these very large powers, they have a lot of differences that pull them apart. But the Arctic was one thing for, up until just like a few weeks ago, it was always something they kind of nurtured and they worked together. They looked at natural resources. They looked at the civil society issues about preserving it, exploiting it in a positive way, but preserving it at the same time. And it was very collegial. And all of a sudden, no, now this is really political, okay? And the Chinese are trying to bust in and all of this. It took one of these realms that there was a lot of consensus, like the Antarctica. Still, that's a part of the world where there's enormous consensus of what should be done, and politics stays out of it, okay? But now the U.S. and Canada, to some degree, is politicizing it, where it's completely unnecessary.
Alexander from Isabella Jones. Alex, you have the history of the Whitlams sacking lacking. The GG didn't sack Whitlam for no reason. The opposition then had more numbers when they combined with the third party, the Nationals.
Yeah, maybe so. But the point is, as I said, that the Governor General did it, I think, before there was a vote in the Parliament. As I said, I have heard that the Queen was unhappy. So,
all right. And let's wrap it up with one final super chat from Penguins fan. I'll throw this to both of you guys because it's a good one. Update on Biden and Ukraine, please.
Oh, we're just getting started there, folks. Just getting started. Okay. Well, Hunter, he was. It was reported that he discharged a rental car, and there was some kind of crack cocaine,
crack pipe,
credit cards, ID, everything. Now, this guy is really out of control. I think we're going to hear a whole lot more what's going on right now because William Barr, he wants to know the whole story, and Ukraine will not be left untouched. Okay, so I think Joe Biden, sleepy Joe Biden, his problems with Ukraine are going to get worse and worse, and because unlike Russiagate 1.0, there was no paper trail, there was no trail, it was all invented. The case with Joe, there's plenty of paperwork, there's a paper trail, and there's money moving around, and he benefited, well, his family benefited from it. So he's got a lot of explaining ahead of him, okay? It might wake up sleepy Joe. I have to say, since we're on his name, I watched the last few public appearances he's made. I really got to wonder if that guy has all his marbles. I mean, some really word salad coming out of that guy. I think he's a stalking horse for Hillary. I mean, seriously. Anyway,
Alexander, a lot of money.
A huge amount of money, and of course he's been doing the opinion polls. If you believe the opinion polls, which by the way I don't entirely, he's been doing quite well. But to come back to what Peter said, of course, he's also going to have problems, because I think there's lots of problems, lots of hidden secrets about what was going on in Ukraine. We've done videos on this. I think all kinds of little bombs are waiting to explode, and probably some very big bombs as well. And coming back to something that Peter was saying about Zelensky's inauguration today, I noticed that amongst these, as Peter correctly said, rather soft words that Zelensky seemed to be addressing towards the Russians, he also, perhaps more pertinently, said that he wanted the Minister of Defense, the head of Ukraine's security service,
fired,
and the Procurator General all sacked. So he wants all these people gone, and he wants to bring in his own people. And of course, the key one to look at is the Procurator General, because he is the person who would be in charge of investigations. And if there were going to be investigations into what's been going on in Ukraine, then of course, he would be the person, the new Procurator General would be the person who would be working alongside Attorney General William Barr. So who knows? Maybe all sorts of interesting things are going on. I wonder whether Sleepy Joe, as apparently he's called, may have decided that perhaps standing for president was not such a good idea after all.
Alexander, a quick update on Assange. Can you please explain what happened with Sweden today? Did they formally request that Assange be extradited?
No, this is a misunderstanding. I mean, what has happened is that the Swedish authorities, as we know, have decided to reopen the case against Assange. And they have now done what they didn't do, by the way, before, which is they should have done, which is instead of simply issue a European arrest warrant, they've gone to the Swedish court in Sweden, in Stockholm, and they've asked there for an arrest warrant to be issued against Assange. And on that basis, they will then apply for a European arrest warrant. This is all at a very early stage at the moment, and we shall see how far this goes. As I understand it, he's still wanted for questioning rather than any formal charges being brought. We will see what happens.
Okay, guys, let's wrap it up there. This was a 2-hour, 20-minute live stream. Great job, everybody. Great job, Peter. Great job, Alexander. Great job to everyone in the chat. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for all your questions. You guys were awesome today. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a great show. Peter, what are you looking into this week?
I'm doing China tomorrow. I'm doing China on Crosstalk tomorrow. Okay. And if depending on news flow, we might do breaking up of Facebook on Thursday to be aired on Friday.
Awesome. Alexander, what are you looking at?
Well, I mean, obviously the big story here is going to be the European elections, which happen on Thursday. So we will see what happens in those and whether Farage achieves the breakthrough that everybody expects him to, and whether the Labour Party will manage to hold off the challenge from the Remain parties like the Liberal Democrats and will be able to maintain its position in second place. We shall see. So there's big news on Brexit, I'm afraid, here in Britain. Other than that, all sorts of things are going on around the world. But the place I'm really looking at is the United States, because we've had more and more information coming out about the origins of the Russiagate conspiracy.
Let's make a separate video on that one.
Well, indeed,
because it's really big.
It's really big, and I mean, there's been some extraordinary revelations about how British intelligence was informed about the Steele dossier that has started to appear in the British media, and I can't help but think that this is all connected in some ways to William Barr's investigations. So we'll see what comes there.
All right, Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk. Thank you very much, Peter, in Moscow. And Alexander Berkhurst, the Oracle of London in London. Thank you very much, Alexander. And to everyone in the chat and everyone that joined us for this live stream, thank you very, very much, guys. We really enjoyed your questions and we really enjoyed having you here this Monday afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you are in the world. We hope you have a really, really good week. Remember to smash that like button. Remember to subscribe. And don't forget, click the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great week. Take care.